Good afternoon. On today's Angry Bulletin. Dear NASA and Elon Musk, while the Artemis missions keep getting delayed again and again, a unique and incredible opportunity is rapidly approaching in 2033. An opportunity to go to Mars rather than the moon, but also to visit Venus on the way back. This is an opportunity that isn't going to come around again until almost 2050. And if we want to do it, we need to do it now instead of mucking about with Moon to Mars. All of this and more coming at you on the Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. As you may have noticed, I was recently kidnapped by aliens and they conducted some experiments on me that resulted in some interesting changes. Just kidding. I decided that it was time for a new look. Let me know what you think about it in the comments if you're in the mood. In the meantime, we need to talk about something really important here. Important in terms of we actually have a deadline. Something that NASA and Elon Musk might be able to pull off in 9 years if they get to work on it now. And I think that this is something that both of these organizations, that is to say NASA and SpaceX, should be extremely concerned about because opportunities like this don't come around every day. What sort of opportunity am I talking about? Well, as all of us know, Mars and Earth move into a conjunction with one another every 2 years to where a transition between the two planets to travel between the two, that is relatively easy, a little bit easier anyway than at any other time during those 24 months. But on this particular occasion, in 2033, the arrangement of the planets is going to be just right, that is, for a manned expedition to pay a visit to two planets in a single journey. Both Mars and Venus will be within striking distance in 2033. Now, we're not talking about landing on Mars, and obviously landing on Venus would be a really bad idea. We're talking about flyby missions here, but still an opportunity that isn't going to come around again until the 2050s. And by that time, well, a lot of us are not going to be here anymore. So it may sound like a ridiculously tall order to try to get NASA and SpaceX into the position to where we could actually send humans to Mars by 2033. But when it comes right down to it, it really isn't that difficult because everything we're trying to do right now to get us back to the moon, the Artemis missions, well, all of the technology, all of the spaceflight capability, all of the infrastructure, everything that we are building up right now that will allow us to go to the moon could also allow us to carry out this mission. Now, obviously, this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar mission. It's going to require a significant investment. But when it comes right down to it, given all of the problems that are facing Artemis right now, all of the delays that are being created, mostly as a result of NASA's own decisions and all of the new technology that they've decided to embrace to get back to the moon, well, it's going to take a long time to accomplish all of these things anyway, and that, frankly, has totally undermined the whole Moon to Mars initiative. It's going to take quite possibly until 2030 before Lunar Starship is going to be in a position to actually put human beings back on the lunar surface. And then after that, how many Artemis missions is NASA really going to want to carry out before we start seriously looking at going to Mars? And is Congress going to continue to fund these kinds of initiatives? Administration after administration, Congress after Congress, do we really think that that's going to keep happening? Well, I, for one, do not. I really think that we need to go after something tangible. In the same way that Kennedy wanted to go after the moon less than 10 years before we actually got there, we should start an initiative to go to Mars and Venus by 2033. And here's how we're going to do it. First and foremost, this is not going to be a one-horse race. Instead, it's going to be very much like the Commercial Crew program and the HLS program, except there is a decisive deadline built into all of this. Now, SLS could become part of this mission, a very important part, depending, of course, on the price points and whether or not we really think that Boeing is going to be able to get anything done anymore. But the reason SLS could be part of this is the fact that SLS has proven that it can get to the moon and back, deliver Orion to the moon and back, and very soon it should be doing a lot more than that. SLS's primary objective with this particular mission, however, is just to deliver the Orion to an interplanetary spacecraft that will have already been constructed by commercial rockets, either the Vulcan Centaur or possibly New Glenn or Starship. So we're going to have a number of different companies involved with this particular solution. The other solution will be SpaceX all the way. Can Starship do the whole job by itself? In many ways, this definitely seems like the better option. One company taking care of the entire project, but there are drawbacks. First of all, it requires a lot more launches to get Starship to Mars than it does to build this interplanetary spacecraft that the actual mission calls for. I'm the one who's actually proposing a competition between the two organizations because we can't leave this whole thing in the hands of the old boys network. There has to be some incentive here. So in other words, some seed money to get both projects going, and then a final contract award for the company that actually gets to Mars by 2033. What if both of them get to Mars by 2033? Well, let's deal with that incredibly wonderful solution when we come to it. So Starship, well, that's a solution that all of us know a great deal about. You're talking about a minimum of 10 refueling launches or so, and the launch of the primary spacecraft. And then once that spacecraft is completely refueled by the 10 refueling launches, it makes its way to Mars. Now, the initial transit from Earth to Mars requires a little over 6 months. About 200 days is what the mission calls for. Keep in mind, you can't use up too much fuel getting there too fast because you have to decelerate as well. The idea is to arrive in high Mars orbit and to stay there for about a month or so, carrying out a variety of different missions, perhaps on the Martian surface via automated landers that could be controlled in real time from Mars orbit. So once that 200-day mission is complete, 231 days, then a return trip heads to Earth for 339 days. That takes advantage of a gravitational slingshot provided by a perfectly placed Venus in order to get back home. Why does this take so long? Well, essentially because almost all the fuel is gone by the time Starship or any other solution arrives in Mars orbit, and the amount of fuel left is enough to get the ship back, but not to get it back quickly. This mission will be aided considerably by a nuclear thermal engine, which is also possible given the fact that Lockheed Martin is conducting the first ever test, or at least test of an engine in orbit, of a nuclear thermal engine in 2027, giving them 6 years, theoretically, to get an engine ready for a mission like this. Of course, you don't absolutely need it, but it definitely would help in terms of timing. Now, there's another potential complication with Starship. It definitely won't have the fuel left to decelerate into Earth orbit. So Starship will need to be at a point to where it can safely bring crew back through the atmosphere and carry out a successful landing. There can be no transfers to a Crew Dragon coming back. So, as I said, a number of complications with Starship, not if it works as intended, of course. I mean, we're talking almost a decade to get Starship from where it is now to a fully functional, reusable ship, which I think is very, very possible, but still a lot of things need to happen to make all of that work. Now, what about the Boeing side of the equation? Well, first of all, I think it's important that we not give this contract to Boeing. You just have SLS. Have them provide SLS and nothing else, with companies like Sierra Space, United Launch Alliance, and maybe Blue Origin taking care of the rest of the components. So let's go ahead and talk about this interplanetary spacecraft. It's comprised of, number one, an Orion spacecraft to transport crew to the mission vehicle in Earth orbit and to provide also direct entry Earth return at the end of the mission. Then you have a Mars Transit Habitat, or MTH, which provides accommodations and life support for the crew. This could be provided by an inflatable module from Sierra Space, or possibly the new king-size module that Airbus is proposing right now to get Europe more thoroughly involved in the project. Then you have an Earth Departure Stage, or EDS as we will call it from here on out, that performs the Trans-Mars injection. And then you also have a Mars Orbit Insertion Stage, or MOI. Now keep in mind, those two stages don't have to be developed from scratch. Instead, they could be modified exploration upper stages that are going to be available on the SLS Block 1B and the SLS Block 2. This has a lot more thrust than the ICPS that the SLS currently uses, and was essentially designed to get Orion around the solar system a lot easier and to carry a lot more payload at the same time. So a series of these exploration upper stages might be the key to getting all the necessary propulsion stages you need to get this entire contraption out to Mars. And have a look at all this. This is where this plan really starts to have problems, in my opinion. There are so many launches required to get this spacecraft to where it needs to be, high Earth orbit. In order to take advantage of the Oberth orbital mechanics, I'm not going to get into all the details as to why that's necessary. It has to be a high orbit to high orbit transfer. You can't launch from low Earth orbit and expect this plan to work. Now that applies to Starship too. You're going to have to refuel Starship sufficiently in order to get it to high Earth orbit and then refuel it again. It could be an open question as to whether or not Starship is actually capable of getting all the way out to Mars and then transition over to Venus and get back without any refueling whatsoever. So here's the ugly details. First, you need a series of commercial launches, 5 to be precise, the Falcon Heavy, to get boost stages into orbit, to push another boost stage, a TEI boost stage delivered by SLS, up to high Earth orbit. You're actually going to need to do this a couple of times in order to get a spacecraft the size of what's being proposed up to high Earth orbit. Keep in mind, this is a big damn interplanetary ship. It has to be, because these astronauts are going to be stuck on this thing for a year and a half at least, actually a little bit more than that. So you absolutely need it to be as large as possible, meaning that it takes a lot of boosting to get it up to the proper orbit. Now, Starship could simplify this significantly. It could deliver all of these boost stages in perhaps a total of 6 or 7 launches, which would save billions of dollars. So Starship may be necessary no matter how you look at this mission. And in addition to that, you're going to need an SLS to deliver deliver the completed spacecraft up to high Earth orbit. It can do that all in one launch, and then you'll need another SLS to deliver the Orion up to high Earth orbit. And one more SLS is also going to be required, because if you really want to orbit Mars for a month or so, you're going to need a stage in high Mars orbit to provide you with the necessary propulsion to get you back home. So an SLS really is the simplest solution, at least if you're looking at this plan from the fewest number of launches, to get that solution out there. So 3 SLS launches, perhaps 6 or so Starship launches. Overall, it's actually not that horrendously expensive. We're talking maybe $8 or $9 billion to get mankind all the way to Mars. That's a huge cost savings over a lot of the other proposals that have come out. Now, even if you had to use SLSs and other commercial launchers for this solution, your total cost would still be about $17.7 billion according to this proposal. And they've laid out all the costs very thoroughly. And you could do it with existing technology. You wouldn't have to develop anything new, any new spacecraft, any new rockets. None of that would be required. Both Sierra Space and Airbus will definitely have their habitation modules ready by then, with considerable life support capabilities. That, by the way, is another question mark for Starship, because right now they're only designing Starship with a lunar HLS capability, not with the capability of carrying out a mission of this kind of magnitude. Of course, I'm confident that SpaceX could get all of that done if need be, but still, the other proposal put forward by this group, who, by the way, are JPL employees, well, all of it uses existing technology, and again, the price is not that unreasonable. So, once again, I'm thinking that this needs to be a race. It shouldn't be a one-solution contract, and additional monies and additional funding should only be awarded if it looks like the launch provider is going to be able to get this mission carried out by 2033. If it looks like it's not going to happen, then they don't get the cash. And perhaps a big bonus is awarded if they actually manage to pull it off by 2033. Granted, this isn't easy. Not at all. We're talking lots of launches, regardless of whether we use Starship or SLS. It provides a decent amount of habitation space and life support for the crew. That's a big bonus, especially when you consider how long this mission is going to be. And once again, using existing technology means that the odds of something going wrong are vanishingly small between now and 2033. Keep in mind that the Apollo program designed almost everything from scratch in a similar time period. This is way easier. It's also way cheaper than Apollo, and it gets us all the way to Mars, not just to the moon. And also, by the way, it gets us to Venus as another bonus. Oh yeah, almost forgot. In order to conduct this Venus flyby, the ship is obviously going to have to pass closer than 1 astronomical unit to the sun, and a sun shield is going to be required to keep the astronauts safe. And lastly, there is a landing scenario for this mission, not necessarily to be carried out in 2033. This is more of the Apollo 8 of Mars missions, but rather, once the concept has been proven, once it's been demonstrated that astronauts can be safely taken to Mars and back, then a Mars lander can be delivered to Mars orbit ahead of time, and the Orion can simply dock with that instead of docking with the trans-Earth stage that was necessary to get the ship back in the previous mission. Of course, that stage will still be there, but also a lander will be there too to transport the astronauts down to the surface. So once again, regardless of whether you're looking at Starship or an SLS solution to get the astronauts out to Mars, this is not a simple solution, but it's one that appears to be affordable and one that appears to be doable by 2033, with a landing on the surface of Mars in the same decade. Something that is just looking very unlikely with the current Moon to Mars architecture, given the fact that we're probably not going to be putting astronauts on the Moon until 2030. How long are we going to be looking at Mars from that date? Probably the 2040s at the earliest, assuming Congress doesn't shut the whole thing down by then, meaning that we are either leaving this 100% in the hands of Elon Musk, or we can try to recapture the spirit of the early 1960s and aim high for Mars. Thank you very much for watching. Keep in mind that tomorrow I'm going to be doing a fundraising live stream, a marathon live stream, where I'm going to be assembling the Lego SLS kit that just came out and raising funds in order to go to Saxavord in July, because that appears to be when the next round of testing is going to be, including possibly the first ever vertical commercial launch to orbit from Western Europe, something I definitely don't want to miss. So don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and as always, stay angry about space.